Here's something interesting. Some of the most genuinely gifted people you'll ever meet have absolutely no idea that they are. Not because they're being modest, not because they're hiding something, but because the very traits that make them exceptional also make them feel, at times, like something is wrong with them. That's the quiet paradox at the heart of giftedness. And today, we're going to unpack it not in the way you might expect, not through IQ scores or academic achievements, but through the subtle psychological patterns that show up in everyday life. Patterns that researchers have been studying for decades. Patterns that often go completely unnoticed, even by the people who have them. So, if you've ever felt like your mind works a little differently, like you feel things more deeply than others seem to, like you're always searching for something just slightly out of reach, stay with this, because what you're about to hear might explain a lot about yourself. The first sign is something psychologists call overexcitability. And no, that doesn't mean you're hyperactive or anxious. What it means is that your nervous system processes the world with greater intensity than average. The concept was developed by Polish psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski, who noticed that gifted individuals tend to experience sensory, emotional, and intellectual stimulation far more deeply than others around them. For you, a piece of music doesn't just sound beautiful, it moves through you. An idea doesn't just interest you, it consumes you for days. A conversation doesn't just pass the time, it lingers in your mind long after it's over. This isn't sensitivity in the fragile sense, it's sensitivity in the deeply alive sense. And for many gifted people, this intensity has felt like a burden their entire lives, when actually, it's a signal. The second sign is that you ask why constantly, and you always have. As a child, you probably drove adults slightly crazy with your questions, not because you were being difficult, but because you genuinely needed to understand the reason behind things, not just the rule. And that hasn't changed. You find it almost impossible to accept information at surface level. You need to know the underlying mechanism, the deeper pattern, the real explanation. Cognitive researchers refer to this as a strong need for cognitive closure. But more accurately, gifted individuals often show the opposite of that. They're deeply comfortable sitting with open questions, complex ideas, and unresolved thinking. While others want the quick answer, you want the complete picture. That drive is one of the clearest markers of an unusually active mind. Third, you've always felt slightly out of sync with the people around you, not in an arrogant way, in a quietly lonely way. This is one of the most commonly reported experiences among gifted adults, and it's also one of the least talked about. Researchers at the Gifted Development Center have found that gifted individuals frequently report feeling like they don't quite belong, that conversations don't go deep enough, that humor is misread, that interests don't align. This isn't about being better than others. It's about operating on a slightly different frequency. And when you spend years trying to tune yourself down to match the people around you, it creates a kind of low-grade exhaustion that's very hard to name. Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. These first three signs, the intensity, the questioning, the feeling of being out of sync, they don't usually look like gifts from the outside. They often look like problems. And that's exactly why so many gifted people move through life without ever recognizing what they carry. The fourth sign is a fierce, almost uncomfortable awareness of your own imperfections. Psychologists call this perfectionism, but not in the casual way that word is often used. This is something deeper. This is a gap, a painful one, between the extraordinarily high standard your mind sets and what you actually produce. And that gap creates a very specific kind of self-criticism. Gifted individuals often hold themselves to internal benchmarks that nobody else can see, which means that even when others are impressed by your work, you already know exactly where it fell short. Studies in giftedness research consistently link this internal perfectionism to high metacognitive ability, meaning your brain is unusually good at evaluating its own thinking. That capacity is rare, but it also means you're your own harshest critic, almost by design. Fifth, you learned early how to hide how smart you were. This one is subtle, but it's real. Many gifted individuals, especially those who grew up in environments where standing out felt unsafe, develop what researchers call intellectual camouflage. You learn to slow yourself down in conversations, to let others speak first, to not ask the question you already knew the answer to. You learned that being too much, too curious, too intense, too fast, made people uncomfortable, so you adjusted. And over time, that adjustment became second nature. The tragedy is that this behavior often becomes so habitual that gifted adults genuinely forget what they're capable of. The camouflage becomes the identity. The sixth sign, your mind makes connections that other people don't see, and sometimes you don't even know how to explain how you got there. This is sometimes described as divergent thinking, the ability to draw links between ideas, systems, or experiences that appear completely unrelated on the surface. A gifted mind doesn't just think linearly. It moves in webs, in networks, in sudden leaps that feel intuitive, but are actually the result of rapid, unconscious synthesis. Neuroscience researchers have found that gifted individuals often show greater neural connectivity between regions of the brain that don't typically communicate, which means your brain is literally wired to find patterns others miss. The seventh sign is something that surprises people, an almost overwhelming sense of justice. Gifted individuals tend to develop a strong moral sensitivity early in life. This isn't about following rules. It's about a deep, visceral reaction to unfairness, a feeling that something is genuinely, fundamentally wrong when people are treated unjustly. This can make navigating the world emotionally exhausting, because the world, as you've noticed, is full of small injustices that most people simply move past, and you struggle to do that. Eighth, you have a strange relationship with boredom. It's not just that you get bored easily, it's that boredom for you feels almost physically uncomfortable. Researchers link this to what's known as high needing for stimulation, a lower threshold for understimulation in individuals with highly active prefrontal cortex functioning. In plain terms, your brain requires more to stay engaged. When it doesn't get that input, it doesn't just idle. It starts generating its own stimulation through worry, through fantasy, through restlessness. What looks like distraction from the outside is often your mind searching urgently for something worth thinking about. The ninth sign, you feel emotions with unusual depth, and you've often been told you're too sensitive. The emotional world of a gifted person is not quieter than average. It is significantly louder. Research by psychologist Elaine Aron on high sensitivity overlaps considerably with giftedness research. What emerges is a picture of someone who processes emotional experience more thoroughly, more slowly, and more deeply than others tend to. This isn't weakness. This is a neurological reality. The amygdala, the brain's emotional processing center, appears to function with greater reactivity in highly intelligent individuals. You don't feel more because you're fragile. You feel more because your brain is built that way. And the 10th sign, perhaps the most telling of all, you've never quite believed the compliments people give you. This is called imposter phenomenon, and while it affects many people, it tends to run especially deep in gifted individuals. Because here's the paradox. The higher your internal standard, the more convinced you are that you haven't actually met it, even when the evidence says otherwise. Your awareness of how much you don't know is vast, and because your mind is always reaching further, it never quite settles on a feeling of arrival. So here's the quiet insight that ties all of this together. Giftedness, in the psychological sense, is not about exceptional achievement. It's not about test scores or trophies. It is, at its core, about a different way of processing the world, more intensely, more deeply, more relentlessly. And because that difference often doesn't look like an advantage from the inside, because it comes with its own unique weight, many gifted people spend decades wondering why they feel so different without ever understanding why. If several of these signs resonated with you, not as a flattering checklist, but as a genuine recognition of something you've quietly lived, then maybe the most useful thing you can take from this is simply permission. Permission to stop seeing your intensity as a flaw. Permission to stop apologizing for how deeply you think, or how strongly you feel, or how impossible it is for you to stay on the surface of things. Because those aren't problems to be solved. They're the shape of a particular kind of mind, and understanding that shape, really understanding it, is where something important can finally begin.